Hello there. This is Kara Clareman. I'm the president and CEO of Plug and Drive, and welcome to the Workplace Charging webinar, one in a series of webinars we've been delivering during this pandemic. Try to keep up with your interest and to help you navigate some planning while we're all trying to shelter in place and work from home where we can. So thank you for taking time to join us today. We're going to talk about workplace charging, all the do's and don'ts, and hopefully it will be helpful to you and you'll be thinking about installing charging at your workplace. I'd like to just set some context first to this, why we're even talking about EVs and workplace charging. I'm sure considering your interest, you already know this, but just to reiterate that transportation is actually the largest emitting sector in Ontario for greenhouse gases, and pretty much in every province of Canada, it's number one or number two. And so we really can't talk about climate change action without talking about transportation. And electrification of vehicles is one of our best opportunities to reduce emissions in a timely way. So we think it continues to be a really important thing to be looking at as one of the solutions. Obviously, there's no silver bullets here, but as one of the solutions to climate change is electrification of both personal vehicles and fleet vehicles, as well as transit and other vehicles. So that's why we're really talking about this and caring about this. I'm sure many of you know that actually Ontario has an added incentive to electrify its transportation system because we have a really clean grid, and that grid is made up mostly of nuclear and hydro, is what we call baseload electricity. That's the electricity that runs 24/7. And then we have almost 10% renewables and about the same natural gas, decreasing actually. And that natural gas tends to only run at the peak. And the peak time tends to be when we've got everything running in the middle of the day. So natural gas actually typically doesn't run at night because that's not a peak time. That's an off-peak time when most of us are turning everything off. And so actually, if you plug your car in at night, which is when it's convenient, you're going to be plugging into almost zero emissions. Nothing is zero, but almost zero greenhouse gas emissions, hydro and nuclear. So here in Ontario, you have a huge, not only environmental benefit, but you also have a big economic benefit because Ontario owns all these electricity assets. Actually, you and I all own them. And so we're actually, by plugging in vehicles at night, we're actually supporting our own electricity industry, and we are helping make that more economic because, in fact, we have a pretty big surplus on the grid at night, which we dump into New York State and into Quebec at night at a loss many nights or for nothing. And so if we were all plugging in vehicles at night, we would actually be doing the province a big economic favor. So for all those reasons, it really makes sense both environmentally and economically to look at electrification. So all those reasons makes electrification make so much sense here in Ontario. And of course, Plug and Drive has been at the forefront of promoting EVs as a solution to climate change. And for those of you who have not had an opportunity to visit us at the Electric Vehicle Discovery Center in Toronto, please, I hope when all the restrictions lift that you will take the opportunity to come see us. We've created what's the world's first actually Electric Vehicle Discovery Center with all the makes and models of cars available to test drive, and lots of cool interactive displays inside. We like to say it's like Science Center meets car showroom. Super fun place to visit and a great way to learn in a no pressure to buy anything kind of environment. Learn all about the cars, check out the different types, figure out which one fits into your life, and you can hopefully from there have the decision that your next car will be electric. And we help fleets too, by the way. So when we get back to normal, whatever that new normal looks like, we'd love to have your organization come for an event at our center as well. Just on that note, we have an event venue inside the center. This is our Power Place, which is a workshop, board meeting space, fantastic facility with all the IT so that you can host a meeting or a workshop or event at the center. So that's my commercial. Please do come and help us. We are a not-for-profit and we are closed obviously now, but we hope to reopen in the near future. So just to finish off on why EVs make so much sense, just to reiterate what I've just said, I mentioned they significantly reduce emissions, especially here in Ontario, at least 90% reduction or more if you plug in at night. EVs save you money because electricity is much cheaper than gas. Even at these crazy low gas prices, which we know won't last, EVs are still much cheaper to run. So it makes sense for fleets, makes sense for individuals. We're going to talk a little bit about charging today, of course, in the workplace, but elsewhere too. And, typically most Canadians only drive 30, 40 kilometers a day. So most of us are only plugging our cars in once a week. So it's really not a big deal to have an EV. It's sort of the joke is range is only a concern of people who don't have EVs, because once you have it, you realize actually range was never a big deal for you, especially if you're just a typical commuter. And finally, this last square of EVs are for everyone. Most people don't seem to know that we actually have lots of makes and models available, more than 40 different makes and models at a wide range of prices. And so it's not just for the wealthy. There's plenty of opportunities for people at every price point to get into the EV game, especially even in used EVs, for example, for people who think that the new car of any type is too expensive for them. So all this to say, it all adds up to a sensible decision, whether it's for work or for personal use. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not thank our sponsors. As I said, we are a not-for-profit, and without these folks, we couldn't do what we do. So we thank them all very much for helping us and for sticking with us during this difficult time, which they are. So we very much appreciate their support. So let's get right into workplace charging and why it's so important. There's a whole host of reasons, and I'm just going to run through these quickly, and there are more that you might be able to come up with. All the studies that have been done in countries around the world have shown people rank the importance of where they plug in. The most important spot for them is at home. Perhaps obviously people like to charge overnight at home, but second most important is workplace. And in fact, California study showed that employees are 6 times more likely to get an EV if they have chargers at work. And that's a combination of seeing the chargers there every day, giving them comfort that they would be able to manage it, and also by talking to their coworkers who maybe have already done it. All these factors actually really increase adoption. So by putting in chargers at work, you're going to inspire more people to adopt EVs, as well as offering this nice amenity for your employees, which is one of the later points about employee engagement and attracting and retaining talent. This is becoming a really important part of any sustainability or wellness program. Certainly enhances any program you might have at work to sort of show employees that you care about the environment. Also, you have to remember, not everyone has the opportunity to plug in a car at home at night. Some people live in multi-unit places, either apartments or condos, where charging might not be possible. And so having workplace charging actually makes EV ownership possible for people we refer to as garage orphans, or people who have no access to a home charger. So that's really critical for them. Also, many organizations, I'm sure many of your organizations, have climate goals of their own. And if you do, this is another step in the right direction towards achieving your either climate change goals, your resiliency and preparedness goals. So really important from that point of view. And finally, I just want to emphasize, we've talked so much about the environmental benefit, and that's been Plug and Drive's focus. But of course, this COVID-19 brings to light the issue of the health issue. And you may have seen that many studies have shown that cities with high air pollution, the citizens have actually fared more poorly in terms of their survival rates from COVID-19. And it shows that poor air quality that is actually primarily caused by cars actually affects our health in ways that maybe we haven't appreciated in the past. And now that we've got this nice clean air in every big city around the world, I hope a lot of us are going to say, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to the air we had before. I like to keep it like this. Plug and Drive is participating in a health study for the Greater Toronto area that's going to come out in the next few weeks. That's also going to show that if we switch our fleets over to electric, we're going to actually make a huge health improvement in our city. And I think that's true in cities worldwide. So, although we haven't seen a ton of data, there's much more data on this issue coming. And I think this issue is going to get more traction given the pandemic we're facing right now. So just continuing on with the theme of why workplace charging matters so much and how you might go about figuring out if your workplace is a good place to consider it. So what we usually recommend is, you have to consider the employee and the employer side. You can't just choose one. And you might consider even doing a full stakeholder mapping on this. Many organizations do that before they embark, just to make sure they understand all the stakeholder concerns, both employee and employer. But here I've tried to list some of the key concerns and things that you might want to take into account when thinking about what do I need to think about when I look into considering workplace charging at my workplace, if that's your responsibility. As I say, you need to think about the demand by the employees. Do you have existing, and what's the potential for drivers? Do a survey, ask people if there was workplace charging, would they be interested in using it? You have to think about, do you want to charge your employees money or not charge them anything? Is this going to be a free amenity, or you're going to charge them something? There might be a CRA consequence as a taxable benefit. You have to think about that. What are people's commuting distances? This is important to ask when you're considering what chargers to put in. Then you have to think about, do people, are they in sales? Are they driving and coming in and out during the day? Are they going to meetings, or are they simply parking in your parking lot and staying there all day? If they are, what's the chance that someone's going to go out and move their vehicle? So that will affect how many chargers you might need. Or are you going to ask people once they're charged to move? Are you going to have some kind of system where people line up and then switch spots? It's a bit more challenging, and in certain workplaces that's simply not possible if people are on a shift and cannot go out. So really you have to think about what your workers are doing and whether that's something that is feasible. Also, are there any carpool vehicles, and do you want to give them a preference? And you of course want to plan for the future. You don't want to just consider how many EV drivers you have now, but how many you might have. And that would, of course, be affected by, are there other, quick chargers, for example, nearby? And you have to be thinking all along, like, what are your rules about this going to be once you have it set up? So these are all important things to take into account in advance. And just this might be a good time to mention that Plug and Drive has developed a guide, and you're going to hear more about this later in the talk, called Lead the Charge, which is a guide to workplace charging. And at the end of this talk, you'll learn how to obtain that guide, but it provides a lot more detail on what I'm presenting here, and can really help you through all these ins and outs about workplace charging. So I'm going to carry on. Okay, what does the employer need to think about? So you have to think about, are these chargers just going to be for the employees, or are you wanting to use them for your fleet at night, for example, as well? So that's going to affect the level of charging you want, as well as the number of chargers you want. And again, what will the rules be? Do you give preference to your fleet, and then employees are second? And if that's the case, are people going to be unhappy? They need to know that from the very beginning. How accessible are these chargers going to be to them? Really key for them to know. Again, like, how you're going to charge for this is really important. And then you're going to have to think about, do you choose the kind of chargers where it's possible for people to pay right at the station, or are you going to take care of that? Another important thing to think about is, do you own your parking lot, or are you a tenant in that parking lot? Because of course, if you're a tenant, you have to deal with the landlord. And so that adds one more layer of complication to getting this done. You actually have to do some physical assessment about how hard this is going to be. Is your parking lot very close to an electricity source? Like, is the panel for the building right backing onto the parking lot, or is it far? Because a lot of the cost of installing chargers is actually the civil work, actually digging up parking lot or cement to get to the spots. And so if you have to dig and chop up the pavement a long way, your install is going to cost you a lot more. So you want to put these chargers as close to the electricity source as you can get. Now, sometimes you can go off a pole if you already have lighting, and there are options, but you need to have an electrician who knows how to do this come do an assessment of your lot, because that will make it much, much easier for you to figure out, how much is this going to cost me? Also, you want to think about the availability of parking spaces and how many spaces you would be willing to devote to this. You have to really think about your ratio of how many people you have who are driving versus how many EV spots you want to make available. And you might have ambitious goals. Some people, what they do is they put in a bank of chargers and then assess the use, but they rough in for more. So they're not going to have to dig up the ground again, but you're ready in case you want to install more stations. That's a great way to save yourself money in the future, but not, for example, over invest in chargers before you're ready. Related to that is the power considerations. Do you have enough capacity at your site to be able to manage these chargers, or are you going to have to do some power management with these stations? And that is feasible. Many of the providers have a system where there's what we call power sharing or power management amongst the stations, and that will make sure you don't go above a certain amount of demand. But all these things are really important to keep in mind, including policy considerations around parking lots. Are you going to tow people if they park a gas car in an EV spot? Are you going to have level 2 or level 3 chargers? And if you have level 3, are you reselling electricity? Sometimes level 3 stations, because they have such a high demand for electricity, they get you into demand charges and all sorts of other issues. So definitely have to take all these things into account when thinking about installing workplace chargers. I personally think the stakeholder mapping is a really great idea, and these have been done by many others before you, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can actually help you with that. And I thought this would be a good time to bring up a case study. CASCAD is a recycling paper company. I'm sure you've seen their products around. They make paper towels and toilet paper, and they also make office paper and all sorts of other paper products. And they have quite a lot of paper recycling plants. They're based in Quebec, but they have operations in Ontario as well. And as part of their policy, not just they did install loads of chargers both in Ontario and Quebec, which started as a pilot program and then got expanded into Ontario. They not only did the workplace charging install, but they actually decided that as part of their sustainability program, they were going to give their employees an added financial incentive to choose an electric car, and they gave each employee $2,000 if they were to choose an EV, which actually encouraged many more employees than they had before. They're upwards of 160 employees that have taken them up on it, and now they have more than 100 level 2 stations at their sites. So pretty amazing. If you're interested in learning more about what they've done, we'd be happy to share. But this just shows the potential of combining not just the workplace charging, but with a real employee engagement program, that they did all sorts of work with their employees to really boost the program and make it part of a broader sustainability initiative. And also they track how many emissions they reduce from this program. It's really quite amazing what they've done, and I would say they're probably the leading company in terms of EV workplace charging program. That takes us to considering what charging equipment you might think of. Believe it or not, there are a lot of choices in this department. And not only are there numerous brands to choose from, there are also numerous features to choose from. So you have to consider, do you want a network charger, which means it has smarts and you can collect a lot of data in the back end from it? Or do you just want plugs that people can use and all you can really assess is if someone was plugged in and for how long, but you can't really learn as much about the nature of the different users, about the time they use, about how much they spent and all that. So if you really want to collect data and learn a bunch about the usage, networked makes more sense. Networked systems, obviously, it's easier to install a pay system. Then people can either swipe an RFID card or they can swipe a credit card. There are all sorts of different ways to charge people. So there are a lot of feature considerations. Further, like, is this like a locked employee lot, or are you going to make these stations open to the public at night, for example? There are also different operating and maintenance models you could choose from. Some of these companies will offer you a maintenance plan where you just pay and they operate and maintain it for you for a fee. Or you might want to just own it and take it on yourself if you, for example, have the right kind of people who could do that. These are all things you have to take into account. You might also have to consider whether there are going to be any permitting requirements depending on the parking lot and the requirements of the landlord or municipality. So lots to think about in terms of selecting equipment. this is another area we can assist you with. We do have relationships with all these folks. And so if you're really having a hard time, we can help you with referrals and the like. As I said, there's a lot of different ways you can structure the cost, everything from making it free to your employees to making it free to employees but cost something to visitors, or employees pay something but they pay less than visitors. And of course, with different RFID codes or QR codes, it's quite easy to have different user groups. That's all possible. You might want to pay, just pay a third party to maintain it, as I mentioned, rather than you having to maintain it. And that, of course, costs you extra, but you don't have the hassle. You know, some companies we know have just had a very simplified system where they pay $1 a day, so 30 bucks a month to the company, and then they just get a window dangler to use the stations, or you actually pay at the station. So there's all sorts of ways. And of course, you do need some etiquette rules. Do people have to move their car once they're charged? Or is there some kind of sign up to know who's going to be using what? And related to this is the signage, because of course, you need to let people know these are EV only parking spots so that people won't park there with gas cars. And in fact, now in Ontario, there is an EV bylaw that says if you have a sign that says EV parking only, you can actually ticket and tow, but you can only do it if you are very clear in your signage that the spot is for EV only. So these are some examples. I wish I could tell you there was standardized signage. There isn't. They're kind of all over the map. These are some of the common ones we see. You're free to choose the ones you like, but make sure that it says electric vehicle parking only in order to qualify for those bylaws if you do decide you want to pursue people that park inappropriately in an EV spot. Okay, that takes us to case study number 2. This one is a city of Markham partnered with Electra, which is their utility, their local distribution utility in Markham. And Electra is running a program called Electric Drive for the Workplace. And they partnered with the city of Markham in a 2-year pilot project. And they put a number of chargers at the city of Markham City Hall location, 16 level 2s, 10 outside and 6 inside. And people are using them daytime because they're workers. And so they're collecting data to optimize loads. And of course, the utility, this is more of a utility project. So they're using it more to learn about what happens at a workplace, and does it increase like the daytime peak, and do they want to put in backup charging, like backup storage to reduce the peak, or do they want to incent people to charge at off peak hours? It's mostly a learning project for Electra, but they got the employees at the city of Markham a very good deal on EV charging. It's just gotten going, so we're still waiting for results from this project, but interesting partnership. So it's something to think about if you're thinking you are interested in doing workplace charging, and maybe there's more than one company where you are located. Maybe you can partner to make the install more affordable, for example, and that's or think about partnering with your local utility as a way of reducing costs. And that brings us to the concept of the Zvip. Zvip is a program that's currently open, run by the federal government, NRCan, Natural Resources Canada. They are providing funding for EV infrastructure. And actually, this round of infrastructure funding is available to workplaces, as well as multi-res and light-duty fleets. So a very amazing opportunity to get some funding. The applications are due June 11th. It was May, but they've been extended given the circumstances of COVID. And so you do have some time if you weren't aware of this. It's a pretty amazing opportunity. You can get up to 50% of your project costs funded by the federal government. There are some restrictions. I've put the link at the bottom here. So click on there. You can get access to all the details. But just so you know, there is a 20 charger minimum. If your workplace is a smaller workplace, there is the possibility of combining your bid with other people. So do reach out to us, even if you're thinking about it and you don't think you can hit the 20 charger minimum. There are ways around that to group with other companies that are doing the same, but it's a really amazing funding opportunity that I'm sure will be sold out in this first round, so not to be missed. And that takes us to our guide, which, as I mentioned earlier on, we call Lead the Charge. So Lead the Charge is our workplace charging guide. It's a very comprehensive guide to help businesses prepare for workplace charging. And it includes, of course, much of what we've gone over today, but in much more detail. Reasons why, how to assess demand, policy considerations you need to take into account, how do you pick the right equipment, your install considerations, of course, cost being a big part of that, operations and maintenance, etc. So as I mentioned, you will receive an email after this presentation with some links, and one of them will be an ability to get this report if you're interested in having the guide. So watch for that. It will come to you later today. I think the guide is super helpful, and we know that actually this can be very complex, and we know companies that have invested a person for a year working on this stuff, and we want to help you reduce how much time you have to spend figuring all this stuff out. Also, just to let you know some other ways that we might be able to help you, if you decide, yeah, you've enjoyed this sort of high level presentation, but you're interested in more of a custom webinar for your organization to walk you through the guide and really help you with your own use case and help you figure out your stakeholders and what things to consider based on your specific needs, we'd be happy to do that. As well, as I mentioned, if you're not sure which products to choose and you need to learn more about the different vendors and what they have to offer, we are going to have a more detailed webinar with all the options of the different brands and what they have to offer. So you can indicate that you're interested in participating in that, as well as if you're interested in applying for Zvip but you need help. We can help with all these things. Okay, so I am going to just wrap up with some final remarks about EVs. And I do have a lot of people saying to me, oh, is this, pandemic going to really take a hit for EVs? Are people, because people are going to be financially strapped? Are we going to see a big decline? Well, so far, all indicators are no. We're going to see a slowdown. The whole automotive sector is going to see a slowdown, like every sector is seeing. But what we see is EVs, it's a foregone conclusion. It's not going to be an if, it's just a matter of when. They'll bounce back. We are seeing many countries banning diesel and gas cars within the next 5 to 10 years. We see sales in places like Europe and China taking off. And of course, nobody makes cars for Canada. They make them for the US, for China, and for Europe. And so we will be seeing more makes and models of EV no matter what we do here. We also see an interesting rise in charging stations, public charging stations being put in by the oil and gas companies. You've, I'm sure, seen the commercials for Petrocan putting out charging stations along the Trans-Canada Highway. You see Shell doing the same. You see lots and lots of private companies putting chargers at malls and at highway rest stops and other places. As I said, it's not an if, it's just a when. And of course, some of the efforts of Plug and Drive and other groups is just to make that when a little bit sooner. We're still optimistic about the future. And as I mentioned, with the health crisis that we're facing now, I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about the health and air quality benefits of switching, and that they might switch even faster than before. We might see a big upsurge in used EV purchases when people are in, sort of certain financial situation due to this period of time where maybe people's jobs have been in jeopardy. So I do think we might see more used, but I don't think we'll see a major slowdown other than the gap that every kind of car is going to see. What they're seeing definitely in China is that the sales are picking up now that they're opening up their markets, and we are likely to see the same happen here. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I have a question here that will the slides be made available? Yes, we can make the slides available to you. I'm going to give it a few minutes to see if we have other questions before we sign off. Oh, here comes something. What is the outlook on provincial or federal incentives? That's a very good question. I'd say in Ontario, chances for a provincial incentive are very low with this Ford government. If the government changes, I think that would change. Of course, the economic conditions we're in now are quite different than we had even just a month ago. So I would say Ontario, very unlikely. For those of you who don't know, Plug and Drive has a used EV incentive going on right now, and you can visit our website to learn more about that. The federal incentives of $5,000 are ongoing. As far as we know, there's no intention to back off of those. Of course, the economic pressure that the government's going to be under because of all the money that we're spending right now on keeping the economy afloat, I think that could impact it. But for now, our intel is that that is not being canceled. So I would recommend that when things open up, if you're interested in that, don't wait because I would say I don't know how long it will last. Any possibility for demand response for fleet cars? Well, that's a really interesting question. Maybe as a pilot project with your local utility. Like I know there's a project going on right now in downtown Toronto in the Richmond Adelaide Center with a company called Peak Power, and they're doing sort of a demand response project inside that building with chargers that flow power both ways, and they have a fleet of vehicles that are leased, and those vehicles can offer power back into the grid in that building. So those types of small projects exist as in terms of like a full-on demand response program. Probably not from this provincial government, but like I said, depending on where you're located, like a Toronto Hydro or an Electra, those utilities, even Burlington Hydro or Oakville, Kingston, those utilities all might be interested in something like that. So it's worth exploring the idea with your local utility. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you taking time, especially in this difficult time. I'm sure many of you are working at home and, like me, have many distractions around. And so we do appreciate you paying attention to this issue. We hope you will think about workplace charging, and you might even consider asking us for us to be able to assist you. We would love to help. It's really an important feature, I think, coming up in terms of your sustainability program. So please do consider it. So with that, I'm going to close this webinar, and thank you so much for your attention and have a great day.